Welcome back to Christian Cosmos. I am speaking with a man today who I found on Instagram with his handle High Church Memes. Turns out he used to live like 15 minutes away, but has now moved out of state for various reasons, engagement being one of them. He is the communications, and it's not director. He'll remind us directly what it is when we get started. But Trey Soto, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm wonderful. And remind us one more time so the people at St. Matthew's Anglican Catholic Church don't get upset at us. What is your official title there?
Yeah, I am the communications coordinator. I got hired about a month ago. I originally was brought on back in the spring when the original communications coordinator went on leave. I believe they had their first kid, and then no, the second child, and then they brought me back after they left the church in terms of the position. And so they said, "Do you want the job?" I'm like, "Absolutely, 100%."
Well, you didn't always start off as Anglican Catholic. I believe you were part of the evangelical movement, or at least the low church in the free Protestant churches before you discovered the high church. How did you go from your early stages of Christianity in the low churches to find Anglican Catholicism?
Oh wow, that's a very long story. So I will do the best I can to keep it short and concise, but also detailed. I was raised evangelical. I believe the appropriate word would be non-denominational. For a majority of my life, I was the church I was baptized into is now what is known as Mosaic, which is a large mega church and one that I have very many disagreements with. And so I was raised in the evangelical church. We moved from church to church in my college years because Mosaic was falling into some problematic teachings and that were pretty much borderline heretical. And so we went from evangelical church to evangelical church, and then I found my footing at a church called Southlands Brea, which they had the Whittier branch, so I attended that one for about 4 years. COVID hit, and then everything shut down. And so right before COVID hit, I was talking to a colleague about Roman Catholicism and why it's ridiculous and everything they do is bad. It's like paganistic. And so they basically responded, I don't think you have any idea what Roman Catholicism is because everything you've mentioned is either false or an over exaggeration. And I took that to heart. I don't know why I did, but I did. And so when COVID hit, I had all the time in the world. And so I talked to a friend of mine who was Eastern Orthodox and a friend who was Roman Catholic. And I hit them up. I'm like, hey, I want to have a talk with you online. Tell me everything you need to know about your beliefs because apparently I think I'm very wrong about a lot of things. And so they were excited for me to just ask that question. So I went down a rabbit hole of reading book after book, article after article about the early church fathers, about the seven councils, the Great Schism, and all of that afterwards. And I was very, very shocked of what I found. Like so many things started to make more sense or started to basically challenge me. And along with some theologians that were very challenging, one in particular was Father Josiah Trenum in his uh, defense against the five solas of the Protestant Reformation, and so that kind of had me like even more interested. I'm like, well, what did I miss out on? And so I was doing a lot more research, and then I came across Anglicanism, which I already knew about by this point, but Anglo-Catholicism, I had no idea what it was. And so in 2021, when churches started to reopen, my friend and his wife got married at an Anglican Catholic church, which was St. Matthew's. And I was very blown away by the liturgy of what is the sacrament of marriage. And it wouldn't leave my head. Like it was just very different from every ceremony I had gone to prior. And so a couple months later, I hit him up and said, like, hey, what's the name of your church? I want to go check it out. And he's like, yeah, by all means, go for it. And so I attended around Advent of 2021, like right before the catechism classes started, which was like perfect timing. And I've stayed ever since. So that is the overall summary of what I had found. There was a lot of challenging in beliefs, a lot of being open to new possibilities. It was a world change. It was a game changer for me.
Now, I'm Eastern Orthodox. We have friends that are
Mhm.
Roman Catholic. We know what the Anglican Church is, and we know the Episcopalian Church. So the Anglican Church is under the Church of England. And,
Mhm.
when that came over to the United States, people didn't want to be part of that. So it broke off and became the Episcopalian Church, which was under the Archbishop of Scotland. And quite a few of them have kind of remerged with the Anglican Church. But what is Anglican Catholicism? Is this the bridge between the Anglican Church and the Roman Catholic Church, or is this an entirely different denomination?
Yeah, so it's connected. Yes, it's a yes and no question answer. Honestly, the reason why for that is, so you were partially correct with the Episcopalian Church coming to the United States. The gap was bridged between the Scottish Episcopalians and the U.S. through Samuel Seabury, which we just celebrated his feast day about a week and a half ago. He was the first bishop of the United States after the Revolutionary War, and so now that there was the Episcopalian or Anglicans of the United States. So in the 1800s, Anglo-Catholicism basically came about when the Church of England, in short, was in a state of crisis. Some of this crisis was one, Anglicanism was starting to become more of an identity, like if you're British, then you're pretty much Anglican, rather than being something of like faith. So it was more of a tradition that ran into England rather than like an actual living faith. The other problem was there was a lot of close ties between the church and the crown in terms of what was going on in colonialism, which started to have a lot of problems there as well in terms of like justifying like, hey, we can do this to colonial states and basically say we're preaching the gospel or spreading the gospel when really we're just taking all their resources. And then there was also a state of crisis, if I'm correct, regarding the lower churches or the more evangelical Baptism churches kind of basically becoming more unpopular. And so the Church of England was in a state of crisis. So I don't have the names at the top of my head, but there were scholars and clergymen who basically started the Oxford movement, which was getting back to more Catholic roots of Anglicanism. So this would be the seven sacraments, the seven ecumenical councils, and certain beliefs that were more at the time Roman Catholic, such as praise of the saints, a very high regard for Mary, so on and so forth. And so some scholars disagree and some agree that, did Anglo-Catholicism have the effect it wanted to be? To me personally, it didn't, but it did leave a lasting mark where this particular I would like I want to say branch, maybe particular branch of Anglicanism came about, which was Anglo-Catholicism. So that's the history of how Anglo-Catholicism came to be. Now there's that, and then there's the U.S. part. And basically, to keep this one short, when the Episcopalian Church started committing heresy of the ordination of women and started changing the Book of Common Prayer, I believe in the 1970s, the more conservative Anglicans basically said, well, peace, I'm out. And so we became known as the continuing Anglicans. And so this was a variety of Anglicans that kind of split off. There was the Anglican Province of America, there was the Anglican Catholics, so on and so forth. And so recently, I want to say in the past like 5, 10 years or so, three uh, we have three Anglican branches that are now in a joint communion synod, which is the Anglican Catholics, the Anglican Province of America, and the Anglican Church of America, along with some other areas in Canada. But that's basically the short end of Anglo-Catholicism historically, both back in the 1800s as well as the 1970s.
And now, is Father Calvin Robinson related to your branch of Anglo-Catholicism, or is he strictly under the crown?
I don't believe he's under the crown anymore. If I am correct, Calvin Robinson was stripped of his duties as a deacon, wasn't promoted to priesthood. And if I'm correct, he's now moved under the Polish National Catholic Church, if I'm very correct. He still has strong ties with those in the CUV itself. And he actually came to our joint synod a couple months ago. So the joint synod of the APA, the ACC, and the ACA all met up in Florida, which they do every 2 years. And apparently, Calvin Robinson was a guest speaker. And based on what I was told, he basically let us have it, where he was just like, "You guys are doing great. but you need more unity because this all these disagreements are a problem. I'm like, you know what? He's got a point. For someone who saw a bunch of cracks in the Church of England, it didn't surprise me. And he's a remarkable man. I think Father Calvin Robinson has really inspired me to become more open and honest about my faith, not just Christianity as a whole, but Anglo Catholicism as a whole. He's a very, very interesting and very humble guy.
And now with Anglo Catholicism, is it similar to Roman Catholicism where the priests are not allowed to be married at all? Or is it like Eastern Orthodoxy where our priests can get married, but it has to be before ordination?
Yeah, so we don't have a strict say in terms of you can or cannot be married. If you are married before the priesthood, great. If you get married after being ordained, that's also fine. And also we don't have any rules on whether or not you have to be married or celibate. We leave that to personal opinion or personal choice, if I'm correct in that statement. So I know Father John, he got married as a deacon, and I think Father Hayden was married beforehand. So it kind of comes and goes. That's the place.
Okay, because that's something that's always been interesting in that the Anglican Church didn't have a set structure to that, where the Roman Catholic Church used to allow their priests to get married, but then eventually said, no, you're not allowed to, because at the time, priests were leaving the church wealth as inheritance to their own descendants. And, they said, nah, no more. And they were done with that. But Eastern Catholics, in the Byzantine route, are allowed to get married. So they kept that Byzantine tradition.
Yeah, I did hear about that and read about that when it came to priests, where it's like, hey, we can't have you giving your assets away, so no marriage for you. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. So, but yeah, we don't have that type of rule. I do know we have a number of priests or deacons who are not married, which is completely fine. And that was something that always confused me being in the evangelical church, because I heard and saw different churches where certain people weren't promoted to like co-pastor or pastor because they weren't married. I was like, well, that's interesting. And so, and then vice versa with the Roman Catholic side, where it's just like, oh, if you have to get married before ordination. So I always found that very interesting. But yeah, so.
The one thing I don't like about the evangelical movement, well, there's quite a few things, but I'm not going to pick on all the evangelicals out there for this, is that they allow marriage after ordination. And I don't like the church being used as a dating service for the clergy, where it's like, oh, I'm a pastor, but I'm dating Stacy right now, but it's not working out with Stacy. Let's see if it works out with Michelle. It didn't work out with Michelle. Let's talk to Nancy. It didn't work out with Nancy. It's not your dating service, this is why I like the Orthodox perspective. And this is my personal bias because I am Orthodox, that you get married before you're ordained, and the two of you are part of this in you becoming a priest.
Yeah, I don't deny that that would be a problem, and it is a problem. As someone who is evangelical, it was always odd. I don't know how to describe it, because I went to Biola University with it. It's a more non-denominational side of evangelicalism, and guys who were looking to become pastors, from my perspective, dated around a lot. It was really weird. Um, and so there was also this over glorification of like being a pastor's wife, which was really interesting. And so the idea, while I'm not Eastern Orthodox, I do like the idea and belief that, marriage is a very big deal, because this is a sacrament of, Christ and his church. So therefore you should be married before your ordination. I think that, to me, that speaks, yeah, you need to take marriage very seriously if you want to become ordained and have a family as a priest, because that kind of imagine how different the lives of priests are between those who are not married and those who are. And if I'm correct, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, if your spouse dies after you are ordained, you're not able to remarry. Is that correct?
Correct. You're not allowed to remarry. So if
Yeah.
you're a deacon, so in order to become if you want to be married and a deacon or a priest, you have to get married before ordination. If you want to become a bishop, typically it's a monk that becomes a bishop, because the monks are celibate, because they have to oversee the entire jurisdiction in that archdiocese. So it's usually our monks who become our bishops, and our lower clergy, where it's a deacon and a priest, have to be married before ordination. And unfortunately, if your spouse passes before you do, you're not allowed to get remarried. And there are specific instances if a priest, something happens within the marriage, that if the marriage dissolves, whether it's through mental illness or something of that sort, he will not be defrocked if the marriage is dissolved. Typically, in the Orthodox Church, if a priest or a deacon get divorced, they have to be defrocked.
And by this, you're stripped of your title, right?
Yeah, you're no longer a priest. You can't serve in the altar. You
Yes.
can't, you can't oversee the sacraments. None of it. The most you can do is be in the choir or a chanter.
Oof. I mean, as well, it's funny because a lot of people that I know that are more evangelical would say that's very strict. And to me, while it does sound strict because, the background that I have, it also makes sense. Like, this is a very big deal. Like, you can't just go around like, changing your marriage status from time to time, especially if you're a very dishonest person. So,
and the other thing with that is that, yes, it's very strict, but it makes sense because, you don't want to use the church as a dating service. And if you can't keep your own house in order, how are you going to keep the parish in order?
yeah, and I will say that I know, along with that statement, I do know a lot more conservative evangelicals that have a similar viewpoint, that marriage is a big deal to us. Just like, yeah, if you can't keep your own family organized, then what are you going to do with the church? And so I will give a lot of evangelicals that I know personally and not personally that, like, a lot of them do take it seriously. But I do agree that, at least in the 20s and college ages, there was like this weird thing of marriage being like, like dating around or trying to find, it's almost as if they were trying to find the perfect wife who will be their, their spouse for when they're ordained or become a pastor. It was really odd. It's just like, look, I get it. You want someone to be on your side. You want someone to support you with this big ministry decision, but it was also treated as if it was like a perfectionist game. It's just like you need to meet like all the requirements in order to, because this is what I'm going to do with my life. I'm like, okay, that's odd.
And before we get into the meme page and how you created high church memes, what was your family's reaction to you converting to a high church that did not believe in dispensationalism? Because the biggest problem I have with the evangelical movement is dispensationalism and John Nelson Darby. And I don't care who agrees with me or disagrees with me. John Nelson Darby was a heretic and still is a heretic. Period. No argument. What's the phrase the kids say? Don't at me. None of that stuff. Heresy is heresy.
Oh man, that was a very interesting situation I found my parents in. So right now, to kind of give some context, right now at my church, they have classes called pastoral ministry, and it's not necessarily to become a pastor, as more to become more well equipped than the average congregational member, like in terms of spiritual growth and personal growth and development. This past year, we recently went over a book series. Some books regarding what is called family systems theory, Bowen's family systems theory, and so basically talking about how your family system, like the household and family that you grow up in, shapes how you are or influences how you are and how you think and what you do and how you react to things. So I'm going through this book series, and I started to remind myself of certain things that happened between my parents and I regarding me being confirmed in the Anglican Catholic Church. And I realized, oh, wow, this is a very interesting family system. So for my parents, they had their early concerns when they saw me reading some books to some Eastern Orthodox chants. I don't know if you're familiar with the guy he's an artist on iTunes. I believe he's Eastern Orthodox, if not Eastern Catholic. Patrick something. I think it's missing my head now. But he does a lot of like chants, like in various languages, like Russian, Ukrainian, English, and so there was a chant he had going that was just Lord the Jesus prayer over and over again. And my mom had like these weird looks of like, why would you listen to that? Or like, why would you be into that? And so I just said, I don't know, it helps me focus. It helps calm me down, which is the whole point. My dad saw me at one point reading Canistos Ware's The Orthodox Church, and well, to say the least, he let me have it in terms of like just being overall concerned of theology that quote wasn't true or problematic. My mom is a former Roman Catholic, and to her credit, she didn't have the best experience growing up in Roman Catholicism. In Hispanic culture, Roman Catholicism usually can be more of a tradition and less of a faith. Like everyone's Roman Catholic, so you're going to be Roman Catholic. So she didn't see a lot of like actual people really being truly Roman Catholic. But because of her experience, me just mentioning the very word Catholic in Anglo Catholicism was a big turn off to her, and she got very defensive on multiple occasions, such as uh, using the word father, using the word sacraments. I even mentioned, hey, give me a second, I have to double check something for my confirmation next month. And she immediately got upset, like, why do you call it confirmation? It's just church membership. I'm like, well, is it though? And so, yeah, that was a really interesting situation. So on the day of confirmation, I originally wasn't going to invite my parents because I was just, I didn't think they'd want to go. But a friend of mine says, I think you should tell your parents. So it's like, okay. Told my parents, like, hey, my confirmation's coming up, later today. If you want to come, great. If you don't, you don't have to. And instead of getting a yes or no, I was basically confronted with, why are you doing this? You're going against everything we taught you. It was a pretty hostile situation that I found myself in. And it got even more hostile when my mom criticized me of having a patron saint that I adopted, which is Saint Margaret of Scotland, back in August of 2021. And so at that point, I basically just told my parents, like, look, I love you both. I obviously want to keep you in my life, but in terms of topics that have to do with faith and spirituality, if it's going to be like this where it's constant criticism, then I don't want to have these conversations, because it's not a conversation. It's you basically trying to make me feel bad by pointing out the flaws that you see. So this is not even a two-way street here. This is just you, having a voice over me. So they weren't too happy about that, but it's lasted since, and it was pretty rough, honestly, to say the least. It did inspire one of my brothers to look into his faith more, which was really nice. He's looking into classical Protestantism. Not the choice I wanted for him, but you know what? I have to let that be.
So classical Protestantism in Lutheranism or Presbyterianism?
He's jumping between a few. He's looking at Lutheranism, Presbyterianism, and Reformed Anglicanism. So he looks like he wants to stay in the Reformed tradition, at least the more classic Reforms, not the John MacArthur-esque Reformed.
So very self-hating misery. I understand. No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
Oh man!
Yeah, because you mentioned Father Josiah, who was a 5-point Calvinist growing up, and he was a Presbyterian, and that's a lot of the 5-point Calvinism is, the elect, and then what was it? The double why am I forgetting this?
Oh, double
predestination. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that whole topic is I don't deny that, God ordains things, but going so far as to say that, some people were deliberately made to be reprobates for the sole purpose of furthering God's kingdom and plan at the cost of them. Like, yeah, you were created to die and go to hell. I couldn't wrap my head around that. I was like, what did I just walk into? I remember even reading a quote. I can't quote it word for word, but it was by John Piper, basically summarizing that he said, like, yeah, the Nazis were preordained to commit mass genocide. And I'm like, what? Like, what did they just read? So yeah, the whole thing is very big on emphasis on misery. So like, wow, this is a very fun theology.
No, but listen, I'm only teasing. I don't have a problem with the Presbyterians. It's just the double predestination issue that is hard to wrap my head around, and that whole notion. And John McCarthy is his own thing because he has zero understanding of orthodoxy, yet he wants to bash orthodoxy and Catholicism every chance he gets. So good luck to him.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that because one of the first videos that really had me interested in more high church um, theology and history was a video I came across regarding John MacArthur putting Hank Hanegraaff on blast when he became Eastern Orthodox a number of years ago. And Hank Hanegraaff gave a response to that. And I was just like, I never really understood people like John MacArthur who directly or indirectly name people from the like they are now in heresy. I'm just like, did you even bother to like research this? Because like half the crap you're saying is not even true. So it's an interesting one to say the least. And I think the sad thing about that too is I recognized at a very young age in my late 20s of the importance of doing your research before jumping to certain claims. And which is ironic because I got a communications degree at Biola. And so it it wasn't so much of like I'm gonna have my entire viewpoints change, but like at least challenge myself and to be open to like, look, if I'm ever gonna criticize somebody, at least do it with like good intention and well researched, not this well, I read this one line and now I'm gonna base my entire sermon on this one line. I'm like, you didn't even bother to read it. So yeah. Cherry picking, I believe, is the appropriate word.
So you go from the evangelical movement to the high church of Anglican Catholicism. And I'm going to ask this because someone's going to wonder, as a Hispanic person, do you go to Anglo-Catholicism and not Roman Catholicism and stick with the Spanish roots?
Oh, I love that question. It's funny because uh, there were a couple of Hispanics at St. Matthew's who are very wonderful people, and we both saw eye to eye that ethnicity and race didn't bother us as much compared to being authentic in our faith and being united in faith. Now, this is not to say that diversity is bad or that I don't see race. Of course I do. I'm Hispanic, my best friend's black, so on and so forth. But it was, I didn't like the idea of like being at a church just solely due to the belief of well, they look like me or they're my ethnicity, so I should stay. That was something, and to my parents' credit, that I never really sat well with because my parents made it very clear, like all ethnicities and races are welcome into the kingdom. And so keeping yourself in one place for the sake of comfort in terms of diversity was not something to take lightly. Like that was a problem. And so I'm not saying diversity is a problem, but this idea of comfort has to be a certain way. Also, this is my personal life as a whole. I'm fourth generation. I don't speak a word of Spanish outside of the basics. And I'm also not a fan of beans, so sue me. And I, it was interesting. Growing up, I wasn't Hispanic enough for people because I didn't speak Spanish. I was fourth generation. I wasn't Roman Catholic. My political views were not in line with the Hispanic majority, and so it never really bothered me. I really had no problem being in a room of people who have a different race or predominantly different race compared to me. I honestly thought that was like that's a pointless thing to argue over to why I'm not attending this type of church compared to that just because of how I look. I found that absolutely ridiculous.
And so you move over to the Anglican Catholic Church, and this is fair of you because every race and every culture is accepted in the kingdom. We have multiple languages for liturgical services. People will sit there and go, oh, well, you guys have Greek Orthodox, Antiochian Orthodox, Romanian Orthodox with these cultural distinctions. And in a sense, yes, but it's more so based on regional distinctions. Because if I go to the Romanian liturgy, it's 95% identical to the Antiochian liturgy. And it's 95% identical to the Greek liturgy. in not in like, well, excuse me, let me correct that. The liturgy is identical. The customs are 95% the same. So certain things that are culturally Romanian that are within the Romanian Orthodox Church are 5% different than what would be in Antioch versus what would be in Russia versus what would be in Greece, and so on and so forth. So that 5% is a cultural thing. The liturgy is absolutely identical. It's the same readings every week, depending if you're old calendar or new calendar. And so I see that with the Roman Catholic Church, whether they're praying in Aramaic, Spanish, Portuguese, if it's the Latin Mass, if it's in English or French or whatever. And so that's always comforting with the high churches. Is that something similar with the Anglican Catholic Church, or is it strictly English because of the Anglican influence?
I believe to answer that question is both a yes and a no. The reason why I say that is because I know that we have some dioceses in different countries. Some of them are the Middle East, some of them are Africa. And obviously, if you're growing up in that place, you're going to have your own language. And so you're going to put that into your liturgy. So it's not really a problem for us, I mean, in any way, shape, or form. Even looking outside of Anglo-Catholicism, when the church would go with when they went to the colonies of the British Empire, they did adapt to languages to help them understand exactly what was being said. So it's not really a problem for us. Foreign language is definitely not like a barrier that we have that is causing us to not share the gospel. It's like if you speak the language or understand the culture well, then bring that to your people, honestly.
I dig it. And now, Trey, we have to go into high church means. How do you go from someone that studied communications, works for a church in their communications, and now you're like, I'm going to make memes and essentially not make fun of the church, but poke fun at the humor within the church?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting conversation because I made the memes. I was making memes before the meme page. So I'm going to give him a shout out. There's a guy a couple of guys who run a very popular Christian meme account called Memes for Jesus, which is Matt and Michael. And so they had a private group of people part of the Memes for Jesus, like for just posting memes in the group together. So I was making memes probably about a year in advance before I became Anglo Catholic. And at one point, when I was already in the catechumen phase of Anglo Catholicism, somebody shared one of my memes on their Instagram account, but there was no credit to me. And I was just like, oh, what the heck, bro? And then I thought, dude, you should start a meme account. And that was my first thought. I was like, should I? So I thought about it for a little bit during Lent, ironically, when I was fasting from social media. Um, I ran it by a couple of friends. I'm like, hey, what do you think of this idea? They're like, yeah, man. I mean, you make funny stuff, so you might as well. So Easter Vigil of 2021 comes up, and I created the account. And so I decided to obviously there's a lot of meme pages out there. So it's one of the things of like, how do I make myself distinct? And this is where my marketing and communication side came in. It's like, okay, so we don't want to focus too much on like Anglo Catholic means because not a lot of people are going to understand that 100%. But at the same time, you also want to show this is who you are. So how do we bridge that gap? So I basically, kind of winged it at certain points. Like I made memes that were from the Bible. I made memes that were historical that I think every Catholic and Orthodox could agree upon in terms of the early church. I even made some Protestant memes that like some people liked, which was really nice. And so to really make myself distinct, I also wanted to post on the feast days when I could. So like not just like Advent or Holy Week or Lent, but even just like the saints. Like today's saint day is Saint Athanasius. This is Saint Augustine, and so I'll post a reel of like the color of the feast day and give like a basic bio of what this person did in their life. And so in a sense, I based my meme page off of a liturgical calendar, which was really helpful and fun. And what I didn't expect from this was the rapid growth it got. I'm just under hitting 5,000 followers in a little bit over a year and a half. And I wasn't really expecting that in any way, shape, or form. And it came to the point where I started getting a lot of messages from people like, hey, what's Anglo Catholicism? Hey, what made you leave evangelicalism? Hey, what about all this? So I started to then further that by having a Q&A once a month, which I actually need to do this month before the day ends, of basically saying like, hey, ask me any question you want. I'll answer it in a story, and then I'll have that story linked for people to watch whenever they want. I then started to share blogs that I would put that I wrote onto the meme page. I started to share, personal life updates. And so it became the whole thing of like it's more than just memes. This is like I hate to use like the more marketing terms, but this is a brand. And so but I wanted to make that like that brand as personal as possible without obviously being too personal, because of my private life. Posting up blogs, posting about the Saints, posting about life updates. And so it's overall been a very interesting experience. And for those who don't know, that's how I met my fiance, was on the meme page. I met her in August 8th of last year in 2021 through memes. How that happened, I'm just going to leave that to God and be okay with that.
And
But
was she like,
it,
"Oh, I'm
it
Anglo-Catholic too. I didn't know there were other people out there," or was like, how'd that go about?
Yeah, that was a really fun experience. So shout out to my fiance, Hope Bollinger. I met her through another meme page called Single Girl Christian Memes, and we were talking about like the weird pool of dating, especially in the more evangelical realm, but Christianity nonetheless. Of how some guys, and preface this, it's okay if you want to be a stay-at-home mom. It's okay if you want to marry someone who it wants to be a stay-at-home mom. There's nothing wrong with that. It's this whole thing of men like oh well, you're in a career, but down the road I need you to give up everything to raise a family. And my fiance, who wants a family, also felt called to her career as an author. And so her and I had this conversation in the comments just about like the weird pool of dating and Christian colleges. And then we started talking privately. And then she had some more questions like, what is Anglo Catholicism? So I like shared that with her, and she saw how excited I was, how passionate I was. And so when she came out to meet me in California, she came to Mass, and she was just like, wow, that was a very interesting experience. And so it's been a lot of fun. So like I've made connections with the meme page. I got clergy members following me. I mean, it's been a ride to say the least. So and I even started doing like my additional research. What was it? Like when to post, when not to post, what are good days to post, how to engage your followers, so on and so forth. And that actually helped me out a lot with the job I have now at my church as a communications coordinator. So in short, my main page was made for fun, and lo and behold, it became an online ministry. I even invited people to mass through my meme page, which was really funny. One of them got confirmed, and I got to watch. So, but yeah, it was a very interesting experience.
So it goes from, "Hey, I should start this in Lent while I'm fasting from this," which seems ironic in and of itself, to it allowed you to meet your fiance and create an online ministry through it.
Yeah, basically, it's. I mean, I will say that was probably the fruit of my labor of giving up social media for 30 days. So, but it's been a fun time. I really enjoy it. And I will say though, I have to like as you can imagine, the more popular you get, the more people see. The more people see, the more you have to be aware of certain things. So like for example, like starting and creating a meme that is quote controversial, it's a hot button thing because one, you get views, two, you get people commenting, and three, people are sharing it like crazy, whether or not they disagree with it. And so at one point, my own fiance told me this, like, you got to keep yourself in check because if you're creating content for the sole purpose of controversy, then you're doing the exact opposite of what you want to do. So I had to like hold that back because it's not exactly Christ-like to start controversies for the sole purpose of getting views. I'm like, oh wow, that sounds
Oh,
terrible.
sure. You say this now
Um,
after I called dispensationalism a heresy and John Nelson Darby a heretic.
in my defense, I have no idea who that is. I think my dad probably did it twice. And oh gosh, Yeah, it's funny. So the meme page is also, in terms of what you just pointed out, is also loosely based off of how, like, what I call like the C.S. Lewis theory. C.S. Lewis became an Anglican, which pissed off J.R.R. Tolkien, and so I read a book on his letters, and he basically was writing to a lot of Christians, both of Roman Catholicism, evangelicalism, Anglicanism, and constantly keeping a lot of people in prayer and constantly focusing on the fact that we are united in Christ despite our differences and despite the fact that our differences may make the other not happy. But he was a very hopeful Christian that, all will come to Christ through faith. And so that is essentially what a big portion of the meme page is based off of, along with just my overall view of life. Like, I may not agree with everything in Roman Catholicism or Orthodoxy. Definitely may not agree with evangelicalism. But at the end of the day, the best I can do is pray for you, have a conversation, and if one of us comes around, congratulations, we can talk more. And so I try to do that and remind myself that when it comes to the comments, because some people get really feisty. A lot of evangelicals say I'm heretical because I'm more Catholic, and a lot of Roman Catholics are like, "You're not a real Catholic. Just submit to Rome, bro." And so I'm just trying to be C.S. Lewis here. I'm just like, I love you all. Let's just talk about Jesus and enjoy a drink or something. Oh
That's the
man.
interesting part about Rome is like, so long as you submit to the will of the Pope, you're all right.
Yeah, I've got like a lot of comments like that. Like, submit to Rome, bro. Become Catholic, bro. I was just like, ugh. Oh man. So, which is funny because I have a lot of Roman Catholic friends, and they're like some of the nicest people. It's just the internet makes everybody the worst person ever.
Well, the anonymity of it all is sitting behind a keyboard and typing stuff out, and nobody knows who you are from a blocked page.
Exactly my point. And I have to keep that in mind as a content creator because it's, you got to remember that some behind the screen of an account, behind someone's poor choice of words or mean choice of words, is a person. And I want to do the best I can to treat them as I would want to be treated, even if I'm not being treated well, even if I'm giving out biblical and historical facts of, certain things. And it's one thing if they say, "Hey, that's not for me." I'm like, okay, well, fair enough. It's another when they say, like, "You're heretical, you're an apostate, you're not a real Christian, you never had faith to begin with." I'm like, Trey, just hold back, don't let them have the upper hand here. That's happened a lot. It's like, especially, which I found always really interesting. It always happens when I post a meme about the Virgin Mary. That they go bonkers when I post anything about the Theotokos, and and it's just like, look, it's in the Bible, it's in history. I don't know what else to tell you. And so I just have to let the comments be. I've blocked a couple of people when they start resorting to ad hominems. But overall, I'm just like, just be the better person.
It is interesting with all of that. And I do want to make the clarification. I'm not calling evangelicals heretics. I am calling John Darby specifically one, and that particular theology. Because this page is, this podcast is brand new. I think you're like the fourth or fifth interview that's going to come out. So with, 3 followers at this point, they're like, who are you to say anything? But, that's my take on one person and his one theology that has somehow helped shape, low church evangelical Protestantism, which that's the repentance that needs to come from that. And I'll defend you because, I obviously have to defend our mother, because without her, we wouldn't be here, because without her, we wouldn't have Christ, in human form. God doesn't just pick anybody willy-nilly and go, she'll do. No, there's a very specific reason why she is our mother. And we will never be able to love her more than Christ himself did. And that is, I think it was St. Gregory that said that. So I'm going to give the credit to St. Gregory for that, because, we can never love the Theotokos more than Christ loved her.
Yeah, 100%. And I think to go on that topic too, going back to some of the original questions you were asking regarding my move from evangelicalism to Anglo-Catholicism, I think one of the biggest problems I had with evangelicalism during that time, and still do now, is this it's the watering down of Mary's role in bringing salvation, Christ, into the world. In other words, it was prophetic. And so, for the record, I said prophetic, not pathetic, in case anybody had misheard that. Prophetic. And it was interesting because a friend of mine pointed out, like, whenever somebody says that God just, she was just doing her job or she was just doing her duty. A friend of mine, my friend Emily, who writes icons, shout out to my friend Emily. She has two responses to that. One, think of the most godly woman you know in your life, past or present. Like, think of all that they've done for the king families in their church and their community. Mary is better than her. Like Mary, like think of someone that holy. God chose Mary over that person that you know. That's how important and significant she was of finding favor with God. The other statement I also give out too, that my friend Emily came up with, was when people say, like, oh, Mary was more than just Mary was just a mere servant, she didn't do anything special. And I'm just like, okay, well, I guess on Mother's Day, your mom really doesn't matter. I mean, after all, it's about all mothers. So why should your mom just stand out? Like, after all, your mom just brought you into this world and gave you the bare basics and did what she was supposed to do. So why should I care about your mom? And then that makes them double think of, like, oh, wow, if anyone said about my mom, I'd be pretty pissed. I'm like, yeah, so can you imagine how Jesus feels when you said about his mom? So that's it's always a fun topic. And that one took a lot of time to wrap my head around, because that was just the world that I grew up in, that Mary was not that important. And so really wrapping my head around the Theotokos, as well as, praying the rosary and having a love for my mother, was a very big a very big jump for me. Like that, like I remember talking to some friends about it. They were like, wow, I've never seen you talk this way, because you've always been this way for so long. And my priest was talking about, the Father Hayden was talking to me at one point about the significance of the saints and Mother Mary. Is that people always say, like, well, you really shouldn't thank the saints or Mother Mary that much, because at the end of the day, it was God. I'm like, well, no one's denying that, but you also have to take into account that God literally uses people for his glory. It's not because he can't do it on his own, but because he wants to show it through that he created in his image. And so why not thank the people that God has blessed with big tasks, or with the gifts and abilities that they have? The world I grew up in with evangelicalism was very big on oh, well, it wasn't me, it was all Jesus. And I'm like, but you played a part though. Like, can you see the problem here? It doesn't just play into the fact that, you view Mary as a mere servant, but you're also viewing yourself as if you're nothing more than a pawn in the system. And I'm like, God doesn't play that way in any way, shape, or form. God uses us for his glory and gives us the unique talents and gifts and opportunities we have, despite our flaws. So I don't understand, like, why it's so hard to thank those in the past or present for all that they've done, in a way that's unique and special.
I try to equate it as, we have our sports heroes, we have, our secular examples of, I want to be, who was the guy that was big in the news last year? Tate. I want to be like Tate and make money and chase girls and all this stuff. I was like, all right, you can have that ideology, or I could look over here and go, oh, there's St. George. And St. George was a warrior, and St. George is the patron saint not only of the military, but of agriculture. So here's literally a warrior in the garden, and yes, we're trying to strive to be Christ-like, but we'll never be perfect like God. But here's a man who was in the military and was able to be repentant and become a saint. Here's St. Moses the Black in Ethiopia, who was a thief and was able to become a saint. Here's St. Mary of Egypt, who was a harlot and was able to become a saint. So if I can look to these people and go, if I'm nothing, and Paul says he's the worst of all of us, if St. Paul claims that, who was an outright murderer and became the most prolific saint within Christendom, then I have a chance. If it's just me trying to strive to be Christ-like, which I'll never achieve with no examples, I'm out of luck.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, I can't quote the word, I can't quote the verse, verse by verse or where it's located, but I know Paul talks about like, imitate me. That's a very big thing because like, this is where another topic, which it's a longer conversation about the whole thing of like a spiritual father. Like we can imitate Christ, but we also have people in our lives, past and present, who are great examples of that. And that's how I chose my patron saint, Saint Margaret of Scotland. There were obviously so many saints to choose from, but when I came across her story on her feast day, I was completely blown away by a person who was basically thrown into a situation where she had no control or say over regarding the fleeing to Scotland because of war from William the Conqueror, and then having to, be married to Malcolm III. And she didn't let that steer her away from doing her job, which, she attended to the poor. She reformed the Celtic Church in Scotland and also gave a lot of money and resources to those of the poor. And so Christ calls us, give to the poor. The apostles say that, but we also need examples. And her example was a very beautiful one because she's royalty. She has all the resources in the world, at her disposal, and yet she continues to give that away time and time and time again, all while living a life of fasting and prayer in a dedicated way that even I was like, okay, I think you need to eat a little bit because you're literally pregnant for the third time. Um, but she was just a remarkable woman, and I just don't understand why that is so difficult to grasp, which I always found ironic in the evangelical world because they would say like we push the saints, and then they'll be like Billy Graham's the best. I'm just like, alrighty then. Well, I don't know what to tell you on that one.
Well, Billy did have his open dialogue with the Catholics and the Orthodox, so there was some love between the high church and the low church. And this isn't a dumping ground on the evangelical movement. There's just certain theologies that we don't agree with, and that's what we're pointing out. So I'm going to ask this from someone who was evangelical that is now high church, and I'm going to use an evangelical phrase. What is the phrase? Unchurched, right? Someone that has no affiliation with ever being a part of any form of Christianity or any religion. What would you first tell someone that is seeking the faith, whether they're going the evangelical route or the high church route?
Okay, so by someone who's unchurched, I'm having a little trouble understanding that. So are we talking like someone who is what they call an ex-evangelical or non-denominational or just an unbeliever?
A non-believer, so someone that's agnostic or atheist or even anti-theist.
Yeah, what would I say to them? Oof. Um, I heard this in a podcast a long time ago at college. If someone is that if someone is in that category, I would probably start them off with the Gospel of Mark. First things first, it's short and it's very, I think compared to the other three Gospels, Mark is very straight to the point. He just gets started right away with everything. Matthew has the genealogy. Uh, um, Luke has the importance of the Theotokos. John has the importance of the Trinity aspect of in beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Mark just jumps into it right away. And so it's a nice, I think, Mark's way to start it off because you start to see things like very head on. And then to go into the other Gospels and see their accounts, you go from there. I would also, I'm very big on communication. I'm very big on relationship. And so this is something I think everyone, regardless of being evangelical or Roman Catholic, could learn from is yes, sharing your faith is important. Living out your faith is important. And what's also important is relationship building. And I don't mean relationship building like, I need to be friends with this person for the sole purpose of sharing the gospel. No, that's a very, you start to treat the person like a project instead of a person. And so build that relationship with them. Not everything has to be a conversation about Jesus, or not everything has to be pinpointed back to God. Sometimes it's just literally getting a drink with them and enjoying hey, I love that movie that we watched, or hey, let's go do this. When you build that sense of trust, you build that confiding of personal life with them. And so when times finally come, where they have questions or maybe they're in a state of crisis, you now have the trust as well as the resources to share your faith with them and for them to understand who Christ is, not just, from the Bible, but also from you as the person who is living out the faith. I've seen way too many Christians, and I was even one of these at one point in my evangelical life, where it was all about just as long as you just sow the seed in them, they're fine. But it's just like, okay, but we have that whole parable talks about like seeds getting splattered in places they shouldn't be. So you probably should be nourishing that seed more than just planting a thought bubble into their head. The bishop at my church, Bishop Stephen Scarlett, is very big on both like a plant that grows, from seed to the tree. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes care. And that's just not for us and our spirituality, but for others who may need seeds planted in them. So that's what I would say to that is have them start with the Gospel of Mark, and then work your way there with the Gospels and build relationship with them, or even better yet, ask them questions. If you have that type of relationship, like, hey, did you grow up in the church, or like, what are your beliefs right now, and start to understand where they're coming from and why. It could be the classic quote, God's not dead example where, I lost my mom to cancer and now I don't believe in God. Or it could just be, something else at that certain points. But everyone has a story. And if you lean into their story while also sharing yours at one point, they're going to want to listen. That's and that's the whole point of a big portion of the Gospels as well as the New and Old Testament. It's storytelling. It isn't just an account of what happened, which it is. It isn't just a historical record, which it also is. It's also stories. So use your story.
I dig it. Trey Soto, where can we find you on social media and your meme page to follow you and have some laughs? Because let's be honest, if God didn't have a sense of humor, he would have never given us free will and watch us run around trying to prove just how great we are as people.
Oh yeah, you can find me on Instagram at the handle High Church Memes. You can also find me on my personal handle, Trey Anthony Soto. That's both of my handles right there. That's from majority of my time is spent. If you also have an interest in Anglo Catholicism, you can follow my church, which the handle is Newport, or you can go to the Anglican Church website. I believe it's Anglican Catholic. I think it's Anglo-Catholic.org, if I'm correct. If you can't find it there, just Google it, and it's one of the first handles that pops up. But yeah.
Real quick, there was a slight glitch. What was the handle for St. Matthew's?
Oh, no problem. The handle is St. Matthew's Newport.
Perfect. Trey Soto, thank you so much for your time, man. When you come out to visit your parents, and hang out with them, if you need a break and we'll go grab some lunch, let me know.
You got it. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.